Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll have a few absences today, actually. A couple people said they were not going to be here. All right. I hope everyone's been able to get out and enjoy the weather a little bit. I don't know if it's going to get cold again, but I'm really hoping that it doesn't get too bad, at least. Oop. All right, let me get rid of this. Oh, wait. Yeah, I think it's supposed to be the weekends are going to be like bad now. Okay, I have 6 o'clock, so let's get started. Can everyone see my PowerPoint or my screen at least? Thank you, thank you. Good. Okay, so we are talking today about national identity and defining Korean art in museums. And we are in week 5, which is not written here, but it should say week 5. And we are going to talk about ceramics today. Mostly we're going to learn how to analyze a ceramic object, actually, which is related to what you read about, right? But first, unfortunately, I have to make an announcement that I don't like, but so I have to change the date of the extra credit session. If you remember, there's an extra credit session at the Spencer Museum of Art. Originally, it was Thursday, March 7th, 12:30 to 1:30, but I have to change it to the Tuesday, March 5th, noon to 1. So I'm really sorry if that affects you and you're not able to go now. I didn't know there's a department event at that time that I have to be at. So unfortunately, this is the day and time that we're gonna have to meet. So I don't know, maybe that works out for some of you, but if you're not able to attend now because of it, I'm sorry. Okay, so attendance question. So let's get right into it. What is national identity? So this week you're reading a lot about national art, trying to represent uniqueness of Korean art. And all that has to do with this idea of national identity. So what is that? And try not to use nation and identity in your definition, right? You can't define the word with the word in it, right? Yeah. Sorry, I didn't even. Oh, did we already have some? Yes, so nation you identify with, right? But what does that mean though? Like, what does it mean to identify with a nation, right? And I have a couple of pictures here to kind of help you out thinking about it, right? Yeah, okay, so one thing, so identify with culture, Francis says. Yeah, so there's this idea of culture being related to this idea of nation, right? Good. So Maddie says characteristics or values that you follow and are common in your community. Yeah, okay. So it's a type of community that you feel a belonging to. Hope says sense of belonging. Yeah. Good. Yes, Tyler, this is very important here. Location and politics, right? So the nation is a unit of kind of geography, right? So we have this idea of there's a particular space and it's been carved out with borders, and we call that a nation. And we feel this sense of belonging to that bordered up space, right? Exactly. So, and that's the borders themselves are that politics, right? That issue of defining them and what goes on inside versus outside, right? Good. And it can give you your sense of self or influence your sense of self. Yeah, Claire. So a country and a nation are a little bit different. A country is a nation is this idea of those borders being really firm. Country can kind of refer to anything that's kind of like you don't have to be a nation state necessarily, but you can be like if we think in the past, like a what are those called? Like a feudal system, right? You have these fiefdoms, right? But fiefdoms can also belong to a country, but they don't have like the borders that we think of in like modern contemporary, like 19th century to present, really, right? Or 18th century Europe, 19th century in Asia, really. Yes, good. State. So in other words, state and country are pretty similar. State, Cameron brings this up. That's similar to like the political idea of having a government, right? And so Cameron brings up the idea of statecraft. So it's the idea of making a state or then building up a nation, right? That country, this particular kind of country, right? Let's see. So pride, yes, pride is very relevant too. So there's this sense of being proud of your nation or your country, right? So you have that identity with it. Yes, and the government, Daphne says, um, how the government wants people or culture to be perceived. Oh, this is very good, right? So national identity is something that the government, in many ways, kind of puts onto the people who live within those borders of a nation, right? Exactly. That's a good way to think about it too. Good, Cade. This is citizenship brings up the idea of citizenship. So you're a citizen of a country or a nation, and now because you are a citizen of that, you are supposed to have or supposed you're supposed to have these particular kinds of attributes or characteristics, or there's things about you that are supposed to be indicated by that, right? Place of origin, Ryan says. Yes, this is important. So you're seen to have been born there, maybe, right? You were born within this nation, and therefore that's your identity, right? But some people change their national identity, right? You can immigrate to a different country sometimes or a different nation, and then you can eventually become a citizen of that nation, and your nationality technically changes, right? Let's see what else. There's a lot of great stuff in here, but I kind of have to push along, right? Yeah, so, thinking about all these things here, we have all these symbols, right, that are considered to be belonging to the national identity or representing the national identity of the United States in particular. So we have things like the US American flag, right? The stars and stripes are a huge symbol, a pattern you see all over the place. And when we see it, some people feel a very strong affinity to it. Other people not so much, right? It is a huge symbol in our culture that is constantly being debated about what is the proper way or what is the improper way to appreciate that symbol. We have like the Statue of Liberty, which is more kind of like a monument symbolizing the ideology or the values that we're supposed to share. The White House, which is kind of more that symbol of the government, right? Who is supposed to um, set onto the people what that national identity looks like and supposed to be like. And then we have monuments to our actual historical leaders, like the Lincoln Memorial, right? And so we pray we have a shared history of leaders or a shared history that we try and use to connect with each other, right? So yeah, it's all of those things within a nation, this kind of shared or common history, practices, symbols, memories, values, all of those kinds of things. And in Korea, there are very specific ones like what we have in the United States as well. We can't talk about all of them, but this here, who is this? Does anyone know? I'm sure someone who's been to Korea has seen this memorial or monument. It's in Seoul. Isun Shin, yes. So Cameron says Shin is with an I is actually what it is. He was a general who beat the Japanese. Well, he was an admiral. I guess he was in the Navy. Who beat the Japanese in the 1590s and saved Joseon from a Jap invasion by the Japanese. And he is touted as like one of those historically shared leaders of Korea that people kind of connect with, like, oh yes, we're so happy that he was able to do that, right? So that we still have our own country. Exactly. And then this down here, this building, does anyone know what this is? It actually looks different. Now this is not the updated one, but yeah, so it's at Gwanghwamun. So Gwanghwamun, or this is Gwanghwamun, sorry. Yes, this is Gwanghwamun. I'm thinking the Gwangjan. This is the Gwanghwamun, which means the Radiant Light Palace or something like that. I can't remember what, or becoming light or gate. Moon is gate, sorry, which is the entrance to what Ian has here, Gyeongbokgung, which is Gyeongbok Palace. And so the Gyeongbok Palace was the main palace of Joseon. So that's where the Joseon royal family and where all Joseon politics were centered around during the time. And so it is a huge historical shared national site in Seoul. And everyone goes to it. It's that place where if you see those pictures online of people in those really glittery hanbok taking pictures in this kind of palacey looking place, that's probably here. It's where all the tourists go. Then, of course, South Korea has its own flag, and they have their own kinds of money with different images of people on them. This is, I would be impressed if you knew who this is, so I'm just going to tell you. Good, yes, Cameron knows. Shin Saim-dong, who was actually a painter in the 16th century. And she is touted, though, it's kind of so she's touted as this very important woman in Korean history, but because she represents this idea of the wise mother. So her son was a very famous Confucian scholar. And so because she also has some with her paintings and whatnot, has some connection with this kind of scholarly life, she gets touted as this very national feminist figure or feminine figure, not necessarily feminist. So, what are the pros and cons of national identity? What do we think? What are some good things about having national identity and some bad things about it? Let's start with some good things. What are some good things with having a sense of national identity? What do you think? Good. Yeah. So, Alpha, that sense of belonging, right? That's really important to have as a person, is to feel like you belong to a group, right? Humans are inherently social creatures, and so having that belonging is important. Um, and that bond, yes. So true, yeah. Truman says unity. Yes, exactly. So within a nation, in order to have that kind of cohesion, right, that political social cohesion, you need to have unity. And so national identity is one of those things that, as Elsa states, brings people together. Exactly. And having that sense of pride, like Claire points out here, that's really good. It's good to feel proud of yourself in some way as a person, right? And one thing that some people find a lot of pride in is their national identity. Let's see, what else? The community. Yeah, so Ryan brings up, so patriotism versus nationalism. We tend to use them interchangeably in a lot of cases, but they are a little bit different. Patriotism is kind of like that sense of pride, whereas nationalism maybe just refers to your belief in the nation, or like you think the nation is or you agree with the existence the existence of the nation, right? So they're a little bit different. Okay, and then yeah, so cons. We're getting some cons going on here. So yeah, pros I came up with were reduce the conflicts in society, right? So that's that unity, that sense of community, the cohesion. So this is another kind of more logistical thing, right? If everyone has the same holidays that they celebrate, it's easy to have like public holidays, public days off. And values, if people all value the same thing, there might be less conflict in society. And then that sense of pride. Yeah, exactly. So what are the cons here? So we have othering, people who don't fit into it. Right, exactly, Clary. So that issue is really the big issue right here is it creates an idea of there's an inside and an outside. And if you're not someone who's from the inside, you can't be included or you don't belong with it, right? So kind of ostracizing people who are on the outside. Yeah. Let's see. So stereotyping, yeah, Francis. So national identity can often lead to a lot of those stereotypes, right? So we have a lot of stereotypes of Americans as like very anti-foreign or very kind of culturally inept, I guess, right? And that kind of comes from our national identity or that national sense of pride that a lot of US Americans have and convey. Um, so yes, intolerance, exactly. So the intolerance of difference. So that goes along again with that inside or outside mentality, right? So yes, exactly. So Tyler brings up some of those big words here: ethno-nationalism, racism. So superiority, the superiority. If you sometimes what we've seen in history, especially, is that if one nation believes themselves to be superior to others, then they go out of their way to try and even destroy those other nations, right, and get rid of them. And so one of the ways that that occurs is through ethno-nationalism, kind of combining the nation state with the idea of your ethnicity, right? Yeah, us versus them mindset. Yes, very good, Alpha. I use that very specifically too, that us versus them mentality, not good. Xenophobia, Ryan brings up. Yeah, that's so xenophobia refers to this kind of discrimination or not, it can be fear, but it is definitely that kind of hard ill will towards people who are not from the same country as you or same nation as you. And that can really that's a major issue, particularly in the US right now, right? Because immigration is such a huge issue. So one thing that people are talking a lot about is the xenophobia against immigrants in the United States, right? Yeah, so I would say all of these are what I said. One thing I didn't hear though is distortion of history, right? I use the word distortion, but mostly what I'm talking about here is you can't always get like a clear view of what actually happened in a particular period because as the nation state, usually you want to either look like the good guy in history or sometimes you actually want to play yourself the victim card, right, in history. And so sometimes that can kind of muddy our understanding of what actually happened during events, right? That us versus them mentality, which most of us brought up, and essentialism. So that's that idea of everyone is supposed to be the same in the country, right? And that lends itself to that us versus them mentality. Yeah, so Cameron, revisionism. So historical revisionism is often a way that governments or even different kind of political factions within a nation might try and make their nation look better by kind of changing a little nuance about history, the way history is written or told, right? So there are some similarities and differences between the US and South Korea. We talked about some of the the more physical ones, right? The differences in symbols and leaders and whatnot. But there's some basic, like more foundational differences too to the way national identity works. So in the United States, we are very much culturally, ethnically, racially diverse, right? But South Korea is diversifying, but it's for the most part culturally homogenous, right? It's not nearly as diverse as the US is. And so because of this kind of foundational difference, there's some other kind of branching differences here. So in the US, we have this myth of the nation of immigrants that we kind of get behind or are supposed to be getting behind. That's being challenged more recently, but that's something you probably learned in school. I know I did. Whereas in South Korea, they don't have to have that kind of mentality. Their idea of the nation is based on their shared biology or shared heritage as Korean people and people who have lived on the peninsula for a very long time, right? So it's more based on that biology and geography that they share. The United States is often validated through these shared values, these abstract ideas like freedom and liberty, right? But South Korea as a nation, they can usually validate their existence through like a heavenly foundation myth, which I'm not going to get into the details of it, but it's pretty interesting if you look up the kind of foundation myth of Korea. And even this nation state in the 21st century, they officially trace their history all the way back to this myth. And then one of the big differences that we probably have already seen in our class is so the United States gives itself the narrative of the hero, the victorious one, the exceptional one, right? Whereas South Korea often plays the victim card, right? And there's some truth to both of these narratives, but you see both their histories are very much what do I want to say here? Interpreted based on this outlook on their histories, right? But both of them still use monuments, sites, symbols, colors, and most importantly, art to represent themselves. And so those are kind of those are the kind of ideas we can find in common. And that's not just these two nations, but a lot of every nation does this basically. So let's talk about art. So how does an object or an artwork express national identity? Think back to what like Charlotte Horlick was talking about a little bit. What are some of the ways that an artwork is seen to be able to express this idea of belonging to this bordered geography, right? Callie says cultural symbols. Yes, very good. So there are particular symbols that might exist and be specific to the people and culture that identify or are being represented in this nation. Exactly. Good. And they're different depending on where you go, right? Different countries or nations have different symbols. Yeah, and then the colors, right? Exactly. And so going along with that symbolism, colors can have different symbolic meanings depending on which nation you are talking about. Exactly. Traditions. So Travis is bringing up traditions, right? So the artwork may belong to a particular kind of practice or tradition that is specific to that group of people in that nation, but doesn't exist in other nations, right? Exactly. So yes, style, right, exactly. So Tyler brings up style. Very important here. So the way it looks overall, it can be the shape, it can be the line. There's actually a lot of writing about line in Korean art as a way to be Korean, right? Making it Korean art. Those kind of things too can be considered as kind of specific to a group of people who are in in the nation, right? Good. Let's see, what else we have? Yeah, this is a good way to kind of generally put it. It's like the accepted norms that Ryan says here in medium, composition, iconography, right? So medium is another important one. Maybe it's a medium that this group of people used, but other groups of people didn't use necessarily. And there can be a lot of different reasons for that. It could be due to their geographical resources. It could be due to some other kind of exchange that happened as well. Let's see what else. So yes, that iconography. So iconography, so remember symbolism goes along with it's part of that iconography, right? Good. But Daphne, oh, I love your extra comment here. Whether it's intentional or a trend that ends up becoming part of national identity. Very important here. I'm going to talk about this in just a moment, but keep that idea. Keep that idea with you. It might be intentional, but it might also be happenstance. Good. Let's see what else we have. Yeah, so as Alpha says, like the verbiage that was used in the readings, uniqueness, things that they look unique to a group of people, right? So good. I have all of these things, right? So style, genre, iconography, medium. I wrote them all down, right? They're just viewed as being specific to this nation. Now, the question is, when does that become the interpretation, right? And who says that these things look unique or belong specifically to this nation? And that's what Daphne brought up with her comment here. So these things end up being believed to be particular to that nation or culture, especially at a particular time in its history in retrospect, right? So think about what's happening in the readings and what they're talking about. So when people are making art, they're not typically thinking, oh, I'm going to make it like this because this represents our nation, right? So if we're thinking, especially people who were pre-modern, right? So we're going to talk about Korea today a lot. And they were not thinking, oh, we're making Korea art. This is Korea. This looks like Korea. That's not what they were thinking. They were just thinking, we're making this stuff. And then later, when the issue of national identity becomes very prevalent, so in the 19th and 20th century, these collectors and these connoisseurs and these art historians start looking at it and they start labeling it they start identifying these different aspects of its style, genre, iconography, medium with the nation, right? So it's a modern interpretation of pre-modern art usually, right? And so what object or artwork primarily represents Korean art? This is what we were all talking about in our blogs today. What was that thing? I said the time period already, but what was the particular kind of artwork, craft? What do you think? Celadon, yes. There's some other ones too, but Celadon is definitely the one. That's the one that everything's about, right? Yeah. Um, so the oh, let me show it here. So yeah, so the way you should say it is Celadon ceramics. Earthenware is a different kind of, you might see that on a museum label sometimes, but in ceramics, art history, earthenware actually just kind of refers to like non-glazed usually, ceramics. Um, and then there's also stoneware, which is a little bit different as well, but I would just stick with the term ceramics, or pottery is fine as well. Good. So Claudia Celadon. So what was Horlick saying, arguing about Claudia Celadon in European/North American museums in her article, Desirable Commodities, right? So everyone get out, if you don't already have it out. We're actually going to look at these articles a little bit more in depth today. So everybody get out the article. And I've put the page number here for you already, 469. Let's try and figure out if you can copy and paste where you think Horlick states her argument, what she's arguing in this article. And we can take a few minutes here. And while you're at it, get out Zhang's article as well, just so you have it open already. Some of you said this in your blog already too. I don't think anyone quoted it, but you definitely understood what it was. Or some of you understood what it was. Yes, very good. Here it is. It will be argued that the desire for celadon wares was socially conditioned and that celadon were collected for a range of different, and then I'll just paraphrase here, a range of different reasons, right? Yes, very good. This is good too. Not exclusive to celadon, but culturally manufactured and socially conditioned, right? Yes, exactly. Either of those work. I think it will be argued that the desire that Alpha put here, that's really that statement of, usually when you see I will argue, or in this article it will be argued, something like that. A really good, in my opinion, good scholarly writing is explicit. So when you see something like that, I will argue this, that's usually that's a good indication. That's the thesis, so-called thesis or argument, right? Yeah, so the idea of Korea Celadon here is as uniquely Korean. It's not inherent, right, to Korea Celadon, but it's something that's socially conditioned, like it says. And now there were two conditions that I found in the article that were leading to this. What were two of them? Or what do you think some of those conditions were, or two contexts, I should say? The two contexts that were conditioning this. Kind of two sides to the same coin, actually, is what I find. What do you think? Okay, good, Claire. You're on the right track here. So Japanese colonialism is definitely one of them. And then Chinese influence has to do with the other one. Who was the one that was worried about Chinese influence? So Cameron, Japanese imperialism, yes, good. In comparison, Westerners, yes, exactly, right? So that's the first one I have here, right? So the U.S. European search for national art, right? So looking for art that can kind of represent different nation states in antiquity. And so Korean paintings were too Chinese. They looked too much like Chinese art. So European and US people are US collectors of art. They didn't want to use that. They couldn't use it to be like, this is Korean, right? Because it looked quote unquote too Chinese. Exactly. But then Celadon, on the other hand, it looked different. So there is Celadon in Chinese history. It's called Yueware. But the Korea Celadon, it looks different than that Yueware from Chinese history. Right? So they were able to make that kind of distinction between Chinese and Korean art. And so that's why they settled with Horia Celadon, right? Or that's what Charlotte, sorry, I know her personally, but so I say Charlotte, but that's why Horlick was, that's what Horlick is arguing, right? Exactly. So what Cade says here, this is a good summary of it, right? Europe and North America, they were looking for art that's unique, right? They were looking for that. And then Japanese colonialism was the other one. Archaeology, historiography, and taste. Tell me more about that. How does that have to do with Goryeo Celadon becoming the representative Korean art? What was that, the reason for that? There's not just one. There's a couple of different things going on here. Very good, Claire. Thank you. Yes. So they felt like, or they interpreted it in a way, kind of construed it, was what most people would say, myself included. I think they construe Goryeo Celadon as representative of Korea's heyday. Right, exactly. This is the glory of Korea's past, right? So one thing is that in the Japanese colonial mindset, you have to have a reason that Korea should be your colony, right? And so one thing that or one narrative that was peddled was that during the Joseon period, Korean civilization deteriorated. It became worse and worse. So they needed to be colonized by Japan in order to go back to that former glory of like what they find in Korea, right? So that's one of the reasons for sure. Exactly, Kate, and that goes along with it. So they're shining light, right? Um, so good. So that's what I have in my second reason here. But my first reason is more like practical a little bit. So there was just a lot of, so the Japanese colonial government was excavating a lot of Goryeo tombs. So Celadon was very accessible at this time. A lot of the tombs, so Goryeo Celadon was buried in these tombs. And so they just had a lot of it. But then they were able to put that narrative of Goryeo was good, Joseon was bad. That's why Korea needs to be colonized, right? Onto those pieces. And then going along with that, some Japanese colonial art historians argued that Celadon has the essence of Korea, of Koreans, like sorrowful and lonely. So it matches this. It's very abstract. I've read these texts and it's just, I mean, honestly, if you read it, it's bull crap. It doesn't make any sense. To someone who's in 2024, it's like, what? But yeah, that's what they said. So unfortunately, you see a lot of that. You'll see a lot of that in older writings about Korean art in general. So then fast forward to the 1950s, right? So what is Jung arguing about masterpieces of Korean art? This exhibition. I found the argument on page 457, or at least the start to the argument. I think it goes on to for a couple of pages. See if you can find that one. A lot of you had this idea. A lot of you mentioned this. Good. Yes, very good, Mitchell. Thank you. This article aims, very good. If you see something like that, this article aims to do something. That's probably your thesis here, right? Or, well, not your thesis, but the article's thesis. So, article aims to consider how a national cultural identity in a post-colonial country started to be formed through material culture under Cold War system. Exactly. Reveals so about the exhibition was gauged in a dual mission to both gain cultural citizenship on the world stage and reflexively internalize this, right? Internalize this identity for Korean cultural identity at home. Exactly, right? Good. That's exactly what I put down too. Good. And this is good too, Tyler. So the exhibitions were about fostering connections between Westerners and Korean people. That's definitely true, and he's definitely talking about that. But he has something a little bit more specific even than that, right? He's talking about not only that it's fostering connections, but how and why it's fostering connections, right? Good. Yes, and Daphne has the same quote there. Very good. Yes, exactly. So I put the same thing too, right? So this exhibition had two kind of twofold mission for forming South Korean national identity. One of them was outward, right? So they want to get recognition on the Cold War stage, right? They want to be friends with the US. They kind of already had to be friends with the US, right? As we've learned with the division of the peninsula and then the Korean War. But this is a kind of a different way to further enhance that relationship with the US, right? And then inward. So bring that recognition back to South Korea and say, look, we did it. We have this identity. We've represented it. And this is what it looked like. And we can all get around that, right? And so to do that, they were really particular about the artwork selection, or who was really particular about the artwork selection. And what did they really want to emphasize or really want to get rid of, or what were they worried about with it? Yeah, so the US was very selective about it, particularly, right? The people who were working from the US, to the point that it even seems like the Korean people working on the exhibition were quite frustrated, right? And yes, Tyler, they want to emphasize the differences between the different East Asian countries, right? So Korean, Japanese, and Chinese, they want to make those very distinct for US audiences, right? So because of that, they didn't want Chinese influence, right? And then we already answered this question, right? So whose taste did they follow, right? Particularly the US, those US people's tastes. So this is an example, right? This exhibition is an example of what's called soft power. So this is not, I don't think he uses this term in the article, even though he really should, right? So soft power, we've talked about this a little bit already, I think starting last week and maybe during Minjung Art too, is that use of culture or economics particularly to influence international relationships, right? So think about these museum exhibitions. The corporate expansion overseas can be a form of soft power. If you've ever participated in an exchange student program or foreign language class, like I have, both, these are actually forms of soft power, ways of using this idea of culture in a very vague sense, right? To get people of two different nations to interact with each other and learn about each other, right? And so that's a way of doing soft power. Soft power does typically refer specifically to when governments do that, which is what's going on here. But you can think of kind of like even softer forms of soft power between universities, right? Which still have that sense of we want people of different nations to interact with each other and learn about each other. So this contrasts with hard power. So hard power is the use of force, particularly, right? So especially military force. And so you can think of the US and USSR when they're starting to occupy the Korean Peninsula in 1945. That's kind of an exercise of hard power. They're trying to use their military to influence the international relations that are going on, right? Um, but recently you can think about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? So that's a very big demonstration of hard power. They really just went for it, right? They were like, we're going to invade now. And the US invasion of Afghanistan, um, uh, was as a reaction or response to 9/11, right? That's also use of hard power. We're not the idea that we're not going to solve this issue through the means of culture or economics, right? This kind of diplomacy, we got to get in there and use force. So that's hard power, okay? So it's kind of thinking about these two different ways of trying to influence two nations' relationship. So let's look at some of these pieces. Some of you looked very in depth into these pieces already. And let's see, what is Korean about it? So I'll show you a piece and you just kind of briefly, what do you think? Why would they want this to represent? How does this represent Korea? All right, first one, we have a painting here by Shin Yun-bok, very famous late Joseon period artist, painter, called Boat Ride on a Clear River from 1805. What do you think? There's no right or wrong answers to this either, by the way. Very good, Francis. Yes, daily life of Korean people at a particular time of Joseon people, really. And these are actually Joseon elites, Yangban, right? So the daily life of Joseon people, right? And Cameron, very much so. The dress, exactly. A lot of people said that. Claire, Kate, Truman, Alpha Cali, Ian. Yes, Ian also adds the hairstyles. Very important there too. Not just the dresses or the robes, but the hairstyles too are quote unquote very Chosun. These are very Chosun hairstyles. The hats are very typical of Chosun Yangban. All of these things are of the elites of Chosun at this time, right? Um, Oh, it makes you think, yeah, maybe it does kind of it can definitely remind you of things like ukiyo-e, which are the Japanese woodblock prints, right? It could definitely still look like other kinds of art, but because of the subject, right? So in this case, the subject especially kind of keeps it quote unquote Korean, right? Excuse me. All right, what about this one? Yes, Kate. Oh, well, we can talk about with this artwork too here. So very good, Cage. So if you see there's some calligraphy on paintings, this is very normal. It's very rare to see a painting that's of Joseon or earlier in East Asia in general that doesn't have some kind of writing on it as well. And in Korea, before the modern era, so before what we're talking about here, for the most part, especially the Yangban, so the elites and the court painters, they wrote in Chinese characters. And as Cameron puts here, it was called Hanmun. And so it's kind of this, it's kind of hard to learn, actually. Actually, it's very hard to learn. It kind of transliterates some of the sounds of Chinese into Korean, and it also uses characters for different grammatical things in Korean as well. Okay, so why this painting? So let's see. Okay, so an Asian animal. Ooh, just an Asian animal. Okay, good, Maddie. So maybe there's some elites being worried about oppressors, and this kind of dangerous animal kind of has some symbolism, maybe is what you're trying to say with that. Yeah, good, Claire. Yeah, so the medium and the verticality. Yeah, so there's a lot of vertical paintings in Korean art. Yeah. Ah, Cameron, yes, the tiger is a very Korean animal. Yes, it used to be in Manchuria and the Korean Peninsula. There used to be tigers. Yes, it's a native Korean animal, and it is a strong animal too. It's a very common symbol in Korea. Yeah. So the tiger, it has a lot of varying symbolisms behind it. This one, I don't particularly know what the symbolism is intended with this artwork, but for example, there are these images of this is a sunshin, which means a mountain spirit, and they're often shown as these men with this kind of mixture of a tiger and a leopard together, as like one of their other forms of an animal. So they're often associated as mountain spirits, right? Because, well, they lived in the mountains. It makes sense, right? And then, as Cameron points out, minhwa. Minhwa refers to folk painting or folk art. That's we're not going to get into the intricacies of that, but yes, and we can see that even on ceramics. So there is a folk tale about a magpie who tricks a tiger and fools him and plays tricks on him and stuff like that. And even on ceramics, you will see this kind of folk tale depicted. And in minhwa or folk painting, you will also see it. So it's a very common symbol in Korean art. But the tiger is, of course, also very strong as well. So you can kind of see, and today, tiger is definitely a very common symbol of South Korea. Like, if you remember the Pyeongchang Olympics, however many years ago that was, the mascot was a tiger. Even though tigers are actually extinct, they were hunted to extinction in Manchuria and the Korean Peninsula. But Korea, South Korea particularly, still uses it as a national symbol. And then we have this last one here. So what is Korean about this? There's kind of two things here. So we've already talked about this. We already know what it is, right? So it's Goryeo Celadon, but what is Korean about Goryeo Celadon? Good hope. Yes. The color slash glaze. Yes. The greenish hue. Exactly. And then, so that's one of them. And then there's one other thing. And it's with this one, it is, oh, yes, the intricate details. Very good. The patterning, the skill, particularly the technique, the decorative technique. It is called inlay. It is called inlay. And we're going to learn. So it's what's making that white and black color here on it. That's made through inlay. So let's talk about the colors. So if you read, you didn't have to, but if you did, read the exhibition catalog, and you see this kind of talk all the time. They specifically say it in the introduction that Goryeo Celadon is more distinct from Chinese objects, right? And then they always quote this Chinese scholar from the Song Dynasty who traveled to Korea, and he wrote that the secret color of Goryeo was first under heaven. That's what he called it, this Chinese traveler. He called it a secret color, bisek, is what it is. So this idea is about, so people trace this idea of the color of Goryeo Celadon being very distinct all the way back to its contemporaneity from Chinese travelers who said this, right? Or a single Chinese traveler actually said this. But there's actually quite a range of colors and hues of Goryeo Celadon. There's not just that green color that we see. We also have like this, which this is a little bit earlier. This is from the 1100s. And how would you describe this color here? It's still the same glaze, but it looks a little different. Yeah, tannish maybe, a little bit more tan. And we are only seeing a picture of it. If we see it in person, it might be different. What else? What other kind of words? What other things? A brown, yeah, light brown. It kind of looks more earthenware-like. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it kind of looks more earthenware. Muted. Yes, this one is much more muted. Very good, Maddie. Yeah. This says olive green. I haven't seen this in person, so I don't know if it looks green, but yeah, these tend to look a little bit more brownish, I would say. And then compare that to this one. How would you describe the hue of this one on the right here? So notice this one's actually from the 1200s, so 100 years later. How would you describe this color? Lighter, brighter. Yeah, exactly. Um, Alpha asks, are there imperfections on this left one that are not on the right one? There might be. There's probably imperfections. Anyone who's a ceramicist knows that there's probably going to be imperfections on anything that you make. I can't necessarily tell from these pictures. This I've seen in person, or this one on the right, I have seen in person, although it was the last time I saw it was in like 2019, so 5 years ago now. So I don't really remember if it does, but it might have some imperfections, quote unquote, which we'll talk a little bit about what that means later. Yeah, pale green, pastel green. I like that. It's definitely a calmer color, Maddie. I like that description. Green blue. Yes, Cameron. A lot of people say blue green or green blue is to describe the color of this Goryeo Celadon. But it's definitely like lighter mint green, Truman says. That's good too. Yeah. So Teal, yeah, maybe teal. I tend to think of teal as like a very blue green, but people have different interpretations of colors, right? So the inlay technique. So this was also touted as uniquely Korean, right? And so you can see that in the catalog too. Again, you didn't have to read this, but it specifically says Goryeo Celadon represents an astonishing technical achievement, right? So this inlay, this thing called inlay, which I'm going to show you in a minute. So, but so in the 21st century, actually, we actually know better. We know this is not uniquely Korean. This is not only Korea was not doing this. Actually, in the area of Manchuria in northeast China, there were earlier wares that were using this technique. So it is not specific to Korea. It is very prominent in Goryeo Celadon. You do see it a lot. It's not the only thing you see, but you do see a lot of this white and black decoration. But it definitely was not only Korea who was doing it, or Goryeo who's doing it. So the way this works is you incise whatever you want, whatever image you want onto the vessel that you have, and when it's wet, right, or a little bit wetter. You've already formed it, and now you take a knife, and then you basically just draw on it, right, with your knife. And then what you do is you take this. This is called slip. So slip is a very watered down clay, and there can be different consistencies of it and different colors of it. Different clays have different properties. And so what you do is you take that slip and you put it into those lines. You rub it into the lines that you just made on the vessel. Then you kind of let it dry, and then you glaze it. So then whatever that normal glaze is, in this case, it's going to be that Celadon glaze, which is that blue-green. This is, in this image, he's taking a small vessel, putting it into a cup. I just kind of thought it was fun. This might be something you would actually see at a studio today, someone doing. But there's lots of different ways to glaze vessels. You don't need to worry about all the details of it. But that's when you put that, what's going to be the green over it, right? Then you let it all dry, and then you fire it, right? And you fire this at really high temperatures. And when you're done, that's when you get these, sorry, I'll go back here, these white and black lines. Those are from the slip that you had put into those incisions. And then the green is from the glaze. So, talking about the history of Korean ceramics briefly here, Goryeo Celadon is actually kind of one of the earlier periods, which makes sense, right? And there was a lot of change that occurred in the Joseon period, actually. So in early Joseon, it was this buncheong ware. So there's no English word for this. It's just called buncheong. That's what it's called, buncheong ceramics. They're kind of like they're a little bit of a Celadon glaze, but they're also kind of a white glaze as well, or white brown. So you see gray, green, white, brown used to describe it. But these were popular in the early Joseon. And then there was an invasion, invasion of the Japanese, of the Japanese general, in the 1590s. And he actually his forces actually kidnapped a lot of potters, because or the myth or theory is that he really wanted these kinds of wares to be made for him and for different what's the word here? I guess fiefdoms or whatever, different shogunates in Japan at the time. So because of that, buncheong actually kind of fell out of use or being made in Korea or in Joseon, and they started shifting towards the white porcelain, right? Porcelain is called whiteware, and especially what's popular, it's not the only kind, but it's very popular, is the blue and white. So this is the cobalt blue, where they would paint it on and then glaze it in the porcelain glaze, right? So you can see there's quite a diversity, even just in these three periods. And within these different categories, there's a diversity of ceramics as well. But what we're going to focus on is the Celadon here, right? So when we describe a Celadon, a ceramic vessel, there's a couple of things that we need to focus on. What are some of them? So if you watch the video, were you able to watch the video from Professor Stiller? Or did you watch it? If you did not, you definitely should watch it. It will be helpful to you, because you're going to have to do what we're going to do for the next like 20 minutes or so for your after class assignment by yourself, right? So When we're talking about a ceramic vase, or a ceramic vessel, excuse me, you want to start with its overall shape or its type, right? So what kind of vessel is it? And that's when you can say something like, it is a vase, it is a bowl, it is a cup. There's lots of different things. There are certain specific kinds of vases as well, or kinds of bowls as well. So you want to make sure you specify what kind of overall vessel it is, its overall shape. Then you want to talk about the color. You can kind of, or the glaze, you can kind of say, oh, it's a Celadon vase, right? And so there you kind of say it's a Celadon glazed vase. But you want to talk about the glaze a little bit more specifically. So not just it's Celadon, which is the type, but what specific hue of Celadon glaze is it? Is it that tan or brown or color of Celadon, or is it this brighter green color? And then texture. Does it have a very smooth looking surface, or are there like what's called crackle in the glaze? If you look closely, you'll see there's these little lines that go across, and they form what many people who are ceramics appreciators think are beautiful cracks, kind of crackling. It's very prized, actually. And then you want to be specific, you want to get more specific about the body shape. So not only is it a vase, but what does its lip look like? So the lip is this area around the hole at the top. And so you want to think about, is it, flared out? Is it flared in? Is it just straight up? Is it very thick? Is it thin? Is it wide? Is it narrow? All those kinds of things are things to think about. You can also talk about, I don't have this on the slide here, but the neck. So the neck is that part that comes down from the lip. And you ask the same questions. So the shoulder is this part that starts that kind of, in a vase, it starts that kind of rounding motion in the body. In a bowl, the shoulder is actually going to be more like, so the word is concave versus convex, and I always get them mixed up. Concave is the like kind of going outward. And so when it's a vase, it's going to be concave. And if it's a bowl, it's going to be more convex, right? So going inward. It's a shoulder that goes inward. Correct me if I'm wrong on those terms. I should have wrote that down before I came in. So is it very wide? Is it, how round is it? Is it kind of more flat? Does it kind of go more flat? Let's see, what else can you say about it? Is it even? Is it an even shoulder? Sometimes you'll see two different sides are not as even, right? And then the foot and the base. So the foot refers to this area down at the bottom, this kind of area down at the bottom here. And then the base is what's under it as well. And you'll see that, I'll show you in a minute, particularly what this looks like when there's an actual like footing and a base on a vessel. But for now, just know that that exists. And then it's decoration. So does it have registers? So registers refers to like the patterns that go around the body of the vase. And then you'll notice like you have some pattern here, and then there's another pattern that's under it, right? And they're kind of marked off by lines. Those are what we call registers. The motifs. So motifs kind of refers to icons and symbols like iconography does, but it can also just kind of be like basic patterns as well. So for example, circles, it doesn't necessarily have like a symbolic meaning. It's not necessarily representing, it doesn't look like anything. It's just a circle. It's a pattern that they put on it, right? So that's kind of like a motif. So you want to pay attention to that. Pay attention to, is there a main image on the vessel, right? Like there is on this one. And then the technique. So what specifically, how were these decorations made onto the vessel, right? So were they just carved or incised on? Were they painted on? Were they inlaid, right? So carved and then filled with slip. So there's a lot of different things. You want to talk about all of these things in your description alone, just your description of a ceramic vessel. So that's kind of why we focus on it, because there's kind of a lot of specific stuff going on. Let me actually skip this and show you. Let me skip this one really quick. Sorry. So this is a trimmed foot. So do you see that there's like this kind of section right here? This is a foot. And it can kind of start up a little bit more. It's more prominent on a cup. You'll see that the foot is like its own distinct part, right, of the cup. On a vase, it's a little bit harder, but it's that kind of raised part, and then the base is this circle that goes kind of indented into it. And some vases have them, some do not. Some cups have a foot, but they don't have a base. It just depends. You may or may not have access to seeing this on a museum website, so don't worry about it too much, but if it's something that you can see, talk about it in your description. Okay, so let's look at this specific vase or object that I have on the slides here. So this is at the Spencer Museum of Art, and it is not on display though right now, so we won't be able to see it. And I'm going to just share my screen generally with you. And yes, that's fine. Okay, stop. If you go on the website, so does everyone see the web page? And is everyone able to access the web page? Good. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. So if you scroll down here, it says digital resources. Click on that, and then you can pull up an image like this, and you can zoom in on it, zoom out on it. You can move around. You can see the details. This picture is a pretty okay resolution. Some museum websites have even better resolutions, but this is good enough for our purposes. You can zoom in and out on it so you can see the details on it, okay? So let's do that a little bit, and let's talk about these different aspects of describing the vessel. So what would you say? I'm going to stay looking at this instead of the slide, but the slide will be, I'll show you the slide later. So what would you say for the overall shape or type? What is it? Well, how would you start? This is a what? This is a vase. This is a vase. Yes, exactly. Oh, yes, you could say convex vase, an oval vase. You might want to say that. That's fine too. So if you look at the website, it says vase with lotus flowers, right? So we'll talk about the flowers in a moment. But you'll see the museum usually labels it with however it's decorated. So you can put that first too, and then just talk about the design or the decoration in more detail later. Or you can just say a vase. Good. So then what would we say for the glaze? So we have kind of like three things that we want to talk about here, right? So what kind of glaze is it? How would you describe its particular hue? And then its texture. So if we zoom in a little bit on this vase, we can get some idea of its texture as well, and a little bit better idea of its hue. So what would you say for the glaze? Okay, so yeah, so Celadon glaze. It's definitely Celadon glaze. Mint green. Ooh, a mint green. Okay, we have a mint green. What else? Desaturated green from Tyler. I think that's a good one too. Yeah, a good desaturated green. I'll talk about texture in a moment. Light green. I would say this is a light green for sure. Washed out green. Yeah, maybe. That's kind of, I think that's a way you could say it as well. I think I said gray green. You might see that. Excuse me. You might see that. Oh, Elsa, this is a good green. Pale green. You will see that a lot too. And then yeah, Fatima points out there's some tan here and there. So with any vessel, any ceramic, there's always going to be, or a lot of times there will be, some browning. And that comes from the firing. And it might be due to different reasons, such as an uneven glaze, or just maybe it didn't get hot enough, or it got too hot in certain areas and not in others. You can talk about that in your description. But that doesn't change the fact that it is a Celadon glaze. So remember that. Yeah, Kyle, I think it looks gray too. I said grayish green, gray green. Good. And then, okay, so the texture. So who was talking about the texture already? I think, yeah, so Daphne says some crackle. Tyler says some crackle with mostly smooth. I would say so too. So it's kind of hard to see, but can you see those lines that kind of go all over the body? Over the white, you can very much see them. Yeah, this is that crackle that a lot of people think it's beautiful. They really like it. That I would say I would say some crackle is fine to say here. It kind of looks like, it might just be the photograph, but it kind of looks like there's some smooth spots, right? Like right here. And then there's other spots that are definitely very crackled, so to speak. So it's definitely a little bit subjective how you label that, right? Okay, so the body shape. So now we got to zoom out a little bit. So let's talk about the body shape. Um, what are some things you would just generally say about the body shape? So the lip, the neck, the shoulder, the foot, the base, anything. Good, a flanged lip or flanged lip. Yes. So I do usually suggest to students, so maybe I should have done it this way. Start from the top and then go to the bottom. So that way you can kind of stay with the shape, right? It's kind of, you can start at the bottom and go to the top too. There's no reason you can't do that. So yeah, so the lip, yeah, the lip looks like it kind of curves out, right? So kind of flanged or flanged, however you want to pronounce it. Um, let's see, what else? The top kind of tapers. Yes, so good. Um, so notice that it kind of starting from the neck. The shoulder definitely goes out, I would say, to a pretty extensive degree. And then it's definitely starts tapering back in. Quite not extremely, but there's definitely a pretty good difference between the widest diameter or width of the vase and then the base diameter or the lip diameter, right? So that's something you want to point out, right? The middle is wide and the base and the lip are narrow, much narrower, right? Exactly, good. Let's see what else. So what about the relative sizes of the lip, the opening and the base? What do you think? This is also something to pay attention to. Yeah, the lip seems a little bit smaller than the base, but I agree with Kyle. I think they generally look the same size. Different vases have, there's really no consistencies. There are particular kind of vase that you will see a lot, which is called a plum vase. Plum vases, this is not that. Excuse me. Plum vases have a very small lip. And then usually their base is about the same size as this, right? Yeah, exactly. So they're at similar sizing, or maybe, slightly, the base is slightly larger than the other. Yeah, exactly. So then the decoration. So this is the big part, right? So the decoration, what would you say? What are some things you would point out about the way that this vessel is decorated? This vase is decorated. And I'm just looking at the front right now. Notice there is something on the back. You can talk about it on the back. You can talk about what's on the back as well. Oh, this is a good picture. What do you notice? Sorry, let's tangent back. Look at the shape here. I don't think this is obvious from this angle, but this angle, I think it's a little bit more obvious. What do you notice about the shape? Especially toward the base. Yeah, Callie, it's offset. It's uneven. This is actually uneven. And it might be uneven from the back, but actually look even in the front. So, sometimes they have shapes like that, right? So yeah, so look for that too. Is the shape, is it an even shape, right? So sometimes you can catch on to it with a photograph, sometimes you can't. But this is a really good example of it. It's pretty even, especially just on this right side here. Yeah. Good. So sorry, back to the decorations. Yeah, so the white flowers are in the center. And there's a decorative border. Very good. Yeah, decorative border around them. Thin black lines. Yes, there's a lot of thin black lines, and not just thin black lines, but white lines too, right? Good. What else? Good. So there's a border around the neck. What would you call this? This register, right? So you might say it like the top register or the register around the neck has this kind of floral pattern. We'll talk about what that is in a moment. Um, you could call it a collar, sure, that might be fine, Alpha. Elsa, the says the describing the line work, very good. So clean, dainty, kind of, yeah, very thin, so maybe dainty. There is a very good, Elsa. This is a great example of a sentence you would see in a description of a ceramic vessel. There is a register along the neck and along the foot. Very good. Yes, you could call it a floral register, right? So obviously this is a register. Would you call this a register then too here, these circles that I mentioned? How would you define it? Where does the register on the top here start and stop? Callie says lining. Yeah, maybe the lining of the register. What do you think? Yeah, so they're definitely using those white lines to divide the registers. Yeah. So personally, this is how I would describe it. I would actually say there's three registers on this vase. There's this top register. There's this whole entire middle here, which includes the circles and the flowers in the center and what's on the back. This itself is its own register, right? And then this bottom register here toward the foot, right? And looking at those white lines, those two white lines, that's kind of how personally I divide it, right? Because I think they intended it to be kind of divided that way. Good. That's how I would say it. You can say it a different way. So what's the technique used here? Inlay, yeah. So inlay is one word. So try and write it in one word. Yeah, inlay. So, right. So it's very important to read the information on the let's see. Oh, is it even on here? Yeah. On the website, on the museum website, because usually they'll tell you the technique. So you don't need to guess usually. And I would say use whatever information is given to you. And make sure you know what the technique is according to the museum. That's how you know you're going to have the right technique. Because sometimes they can look very similar. Okay, good. So, yeah, all of this is basically what I said. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, yes, the type of flower. So what is the type of flower here on this one? Yeah, a lotus, as Alpha put. So now the question is, how do you know? How do you know that this is a lotus, though? The museum told you. The museum says so, but how else do you know? Okay, the leaf bed. Very good. So you can look at the so look, yes, the taller. Very good, Callie. So if you look, lotuses usually have this long stem, and then they usually have these kinds of pointed leaves or petals, these petals that go to a point here. And lotuses grow out of water. So you're going to see usually some indication of water here. Here they use some lines. Unfortunately, I'm not on the website right now, so I can't zoom in. But you can tell that they tried to indicate that a little bit, right? So that's how you can identify the lotus, or those is that kind of thing, right? So there's a lot of, and we're going to go to, we're going to go, let's look at some of these other flowers, and we'll return to the lotus here. So this flower here that was on the earlier vessel, this is called Baoxianghua or Bosanghua. This is an imaginary flower. It's not real. It's a combination of a peony, a chrysanthemum, and a lotus. And so it has the symbolisms of like elegance, integrity, purity, but it kind of looks like a lot of vines like this. If you can see, the vines are kind of all over the place. And then there's these big petaled flowers in the middle of it. So this is what that one is. And it has particular kinds of symbolisms. There are these ones, which we've seen a lot of already. These smaller flowers with the circle in the middle, and then they have these small petals. These are chrysanthemums. So they are, you don't need to know about the four gentlemen, but they're usually associated with autumn, and they're used a lot because they bloom in autumn. In the US, we call them mums most of the time. We say mums, but the chrysanthemum and a mum. So they're associated with that time period. So harvest, right? Also elegance and integrity, I guess. You'll see a lot of these symbolisms are very vague. I think it's because people can't agree on what they're supposed to be. And then this last one is the peony. So do you see, so this is the hard part. It kind of looks like this one, but it's still a little bit different here. So there's a lot of the vines going on, but then there's this big flower in the middle. Yes, Callie, the ruffle petals. Very good. So notice this is almost like cloud-like. You see this peony, these are very big. If you've ever seen one in person, they're actually my favorite flower. They're known as the king of flowers because they have so many petals. They're very bulbous. Um, and they do have their petals usually look very kind of like rounded, ruffly, cloud-like, right? And so they're a symbol of wealth, of course, because they're big. And they're usually associated with spring because they bloom in the springtime. And so the techniques. So what do you think this technique is here on the left? We're about to run out of time, so I might not talk about the lotus again. So this is painted in underglaze. So this is actually painted with that black slip and then glaze. So we just say, you'll see this word underglaze. That means that it's been painted and then glazed over. This one in the middle is, of course, inlaid, you can say. It is inlaid, or it has the inlay technique. And then this one is just carved or incised here over on the right. Okay, so the lotus. So again, think about those pointed petals emerging from the water. It can be Buddhist symbolism. It can also be Confucian symbolism. They get mixed up a lot. And it's usually a symbol of purity because it's like this bloom coming out of the muddy water. It's also a symbol of nobility, especially kind of a Confucian symbolism. And then in Buddhism, it's definitely a symbolism of that rebirth. So there's Amitabha Buddha. You don't need to know who this is usually symbolized as being reborn in the Pure Land on coming out of a lotus blossom. So that's kind of where one of the places that it comes from. And so why is it on ceramics so much? Well, it's that visual reminder for pure thoughts and actions, and also nobility. Can also have been commissioned by a Buddhist temple. Buddhist temples also, especially during Korea, Buddhism was the main religion. It was a state religion, so it had a lot of power at the time. Okay, so your plenary session response is a little bit different than normal. It's worth 30 points, and I'm sorry, if you need to go, you can go. You should be able to just download this document, read the instructions, and understand what's going on, what you need to do. The difference is that it needs to be a little bit longer, like 350 words, and I have a little bit more freedom. So you're going to go on the Cleveland Museum of Art website, which is linked on the document. You're going to look for a Goryeo Celadon object, and it tells you how to put that in. Pick one that you like or dislike and describe it like what we practice in class. And then for the interpretation, so this is going to be based a lot on the museum information. What do you think its original function was? What do you think the significance of the motifs are? And then think about what the museum says. There usually is a little blurb. And ask and answer the question, does it frame the piece within a nationalist framework? So does it like tote this as uniquely Korean, right? And then like what you answered for the blog, do you think this object represents Korean art well? Okay. If you have questions, you can stay back. Thank you. Sorry for going over slightly. And if you have questions while you're doing this, email me. I will be very lenient about the symbolisms and stuff like that. You don't need to do a bunch of extra work. Just based on what we talked about in class today, just do your best. Thank you.